This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More about them later in the video. There are far too many comedians whose lives have been cut short. Far too many are born to make others laugh while hiding the truth behind the jokes, the demons they live with, and how they learn to deal with these demons. In the world of comedy, many stars have burned bright, but few as bright or as brief as John Belushi. In the 1970s, Belushi redefined what it meant to be funny. His career began in Chicago, and as he started rising, there was no stopping him, landing him a spot on SNL, in movies, and even as a successful musician. John Belushi was not just a comedian. He was a force of nature. His career, a blur of success and excess. A story that you could say is very short, sure, but there's no denying how unbelievably eventful it was. This is the story of John Belushi. Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was provided by James CJ, so be sure to show them some love as you deploy your likes and do all the things that help keep the eldritch beast that is the YouTube algorithm going. Let's get to it. It was on January 24th, 1949, in Chicago that Adam and Agnes Belushi welcomed their second child, John Belushi. His parents had strong Albanian roots, with Agnes being born to immigrant parents and Adam being an immigrant himself. The family lived in Wheaton, Illinois, and John and his sister Marion would go on to have two more siblings, Billy and Jim Belushi. Growing up, John was a well-liked, easygoing boy in his community. Belushi was charismatic from the moment he could form sentences. He wasn't afraid to talk to anyone and everyone, and there were early signs of his signature charisma and energy. In adolescence, Belushi went on to Wheaton Central High School, where he'd meet Judith Jacklin, the woman he'd fall in love with and eventually marry. In high school, Belushi was an attractive student, playing on the football team, being in the drama club, and showcasing an early interest in music. At the age of 16, in 1965, Belushi's love of music began when he formed the band The Ravens with four of his friends. Together, they recorded a song in which Belushi both sang and played drums. Ultimately, due to the single's lack of traction, the band broke up. So, now what? High school was coming to an end and Belushi needed a plan for his future. Let's just say that what came next was a zigzag of decisions that were motivated by a specific reason, and that reason wasn't exactly academic. As he graduated from high school, Belushi decided to attend college. He was offered a football and acting scholarship from Illinois Wesleyan University, but ultimately his grades weren't high enough to earn admission. So he instead went to the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater in 1967. This fallback choice didn't help his interest, as there was no football team and only a modest theater program. Additionally, it was far from his home in Illinois. He'd return every week to Chicago to see his family and Judith. And then in the spring of 1968, faced with the choice of getting more student loans to continue, very relatable, John decided to drop out, super relatable. When the College of DuPage opened in 1968, he decided to enroll, considering it was cheaper and allowed him to stay closer to his family and girlfriend. Despite Belushi's disinterest in academics, he stayed in college for a very specific reason. It meant he could avoid the draft as long as he was enrolled as a full-time student. But the college years were a time for something else, experimentation. And not the kind you're probably thinking of at this point if you don't know who Belushi was as a person. Starting at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, Belushi began his experimentation with drugs. At first, it was simply Mary Jane, a major drug of the time and today, especially during the Vietnam counterculture movement. But nobody would describe Belushi as having a problem at this point. He drank a lot and he smoked a bit, but it wasn't abnormal for a college student or someone in their 30s. I guess, given the state of the world. Yeah. Moving on. Thankfully, right now he was more focused on comedy. The other stuff, which I'm sure you're waiting for, would come later. While he attended the College of DuPage, he sought to explore comedy, which led him to create the West Compass Players with his friends. The West Compass Players performed throughout campus in open spaces, satirizing everything from politics to hippies, and in an early indication of Belushi's style, they even incorporated music into their bits. This was also the earliest incarnation of his Joe Crocker impression, which he'd become well known for later on. One day, Joyce Sloan, a producer over at Second City, heard of Belushi while visiting the school. She was there to propose having Second City come visit the campus, but the school declined, saying the students didn't need them, seeing as they had Belushi. But this put John on Joyce Sloan's radar, which would matter very soon. In 1970, after completing a 2-year program, he transferred to UIC's Circle campus and rented a place with his West Compass Player co-founder and friend, Tony Insana. Which, apparently this dude's just frickin' legendary. He's voiced so many animated characters and directed a bunch of stuff too. They continued to develop material and perform it in an effort to keep the West Compass players alive. Then, after 3 years of college in total, he decided to drop out for the second time. He was ready to take a chance and audition for Second City. He had never really wanted to study, so he was ready to move on to something he actually wanted to do. While college wasn't for Belushi, it was clear that it was beneficial. It was here he'd begun finding his comedic voice and setting himself on a trajectory towards fame, money, success, and of course, vices. Now it was time to see if Second City was ready for John Belushi. And really, who was ready for John Belushi? If you want your business to leave a lasting legacy like John Belushi's comedy career, then you're going to need a snazzy website. And the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace, has you covered. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform, perfect for entrepreneurs and hobbyists alike. Recently, I needed to make a simple website for a tabletop RPG I'm developing and playtesting to make looking through the rulebook easier. And it was beyond simple to add sections, format, and even incorporate my existing knowledge of CSS and HTML, though you don't need any knowledge in that area at all. And that's all thanks to Squarespace's innovative Fluid Engine. The Fluid Engine makes it easier than ever for pretty much anyone to dive in and make a beautiful website. Answer a few questions about the goals you'd like to accomplish with your site, choose a template, and get dragging and dropping elements onto your template. Drag and drop technology is included in every Squarespace site. But that's not all, because if you're working on long-term projects like any of the stuff that I'm working on a regular basis, Squarespace makes it easy for you to create members-only content for your community. Monetize your projects by selling access to online courses, blogs, videos, and memberships. Start with a fully customizable website and earn recurring revenue by gating off your content behind a paywall. Simply set the price and choose whether to charge one-time fee or subscription for access. And then use Squarespace email campaigns to make it easy for you to spread the word about your project, engage with clients, promote your services, and grow your business. Plus, if you're as busy as I am, you can even set up email automations to stay connected, nurture leads, and save time. Ready to get started? Head to squarespace.com/biographics for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use offer code Biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming. In February 1971, Belushi auditioned for Second City and got in. Due to Joyce Sloan already being familiar with Belushi, he had a leg up over the competition, allowing him to skip the touring company altogether, unlike most recruits. During the 16 months John was at Second City, he began developing his signature style: loud, physical, music-infused, and hilarious. He was a fearless performer and a lover of the spotlight. At this period in his life, his drinking became heavier. It didn't take long for him to become a breakout star in the company, popular with both audiences and critics. Then an opportunity came knocking that would end his time at Second City far sooner than anyone had anticipated. The thing about Belushi was he wasn't content to stay in any one place for too long. In hindsight, the warning signs had been there for a long time. His short time at the University of Wisconsin, the DuPage chapter, and now the end of his time at Second City. While some saw Second City as a career, Belushi saw it as a stepping stone. He wanted the bigger stage, so when National Lampoon came knocking, he was all in. Producers Tony Hendra and Doug Kenny were putting together a production called National Lampoon's Lemmings, which was a satirical stage parody of Woodstock. As a side note, I'd like to see SNL or some sketch comedy do a parody of Woodstock 99 and just lambast the shit out of Fred Durst. Seems like a good idea to me. I don't know. It would be debuting in New York City, and they wanted up-and-coming stars that could blend edgy comedy with sketches, music, and chaos. If that's not a description of Belushi, I don't know what is. After his audition, Belushi got the part on the spot. It came at the perfect time, too. John began having issues at Second City, butting heads with management and the producers due to his behavior. He had garnered a reputation for changing sketches mid-performance, ignoring cues, and improvising far beyond the script. While this thrilled audiences, it frustrated colleagues, who felt steamrolled and lost in what was becoming known as the Belushi Show. With this new opportunity, though, it was not hard to say goodbye to Second City. This chance to star in National Lampoon's Lemmings meant greater exposure, a better paycheck, and a step closer to true fame. Unfortunately, this was where his new best friend would enter the picture. Cocaine, baby! He was slowly becoming an addict, and sadly, because it was so normalized in his professional and social life, and still is in the business world, he wouldn't realize the harm he was doing until it was too late. Right now, he had some restraint, but with time, that would disappear. The show premiered off-Broadway in January 1973 and became a breakout hit. The show drew huge audiences and attention from the press. When Lemmings ended, he went on to join the National Lampoon Radio Hour as a performer and writer. This was where he continued to hone his voice and comedic instincts. The cast included some names you'll be familiar with, like Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, and Gilda Radner. National Lampoon Radio Hour would form the nucleus for the first cast of the forthcoming sketch comedy show, Saturday Night Live, and nobody knew just how successful that would become and the stars it would make of its cast, but they were about to find out. By this stage in the game, Belushi was a known entity in comedy circles. People knew his comedic talents were manic and angry, but always funny. He had a wide array of characters and sketches, which showcased the range he had as a performer. Unfortunately, though, behind the scenes of National Lampoon Radio Hour, he was also becoming a pattern. He was clashing with everyone over creative control and his behavior. In 1975, a young producer named Lorne Michaels began assembling a cast for a sketch show that would debut on NBC, later known as Saturday Night Live. However, Belushi was not Lorne's first choice. He was well aware of John's reputation for being difficult to work with, volatile, and nearly unmanageable. If it wasn't for Lampoon's head writer Michael O'Donoghue advocating for Belushi, he may never have gotten the job. After a while, Lorne decided to take a chance and cast Belushi as one of the not ready for primetime players, which included Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin, Gilda Radner, Garrett Morris, and Lorraine Newman. On October 11th, 1975, SNL premiered. As you might have expected, among the notable performances, Belushi's star shone bright that night. He played characters that were either signature or would become signature characters in time, such as Samurai Futaba, Joe Cocker, and several parodies. In a cast of cerebral comedians, Belushi was the wild card. It didn't take long for him to become the breakout star for a third time on yet another stage. He had a rivalry with Chevy Chase, although at this point, who didn't? Whom he worked with on Lemmings, due to Chase garnering most of the attention early on. But he left after one season, clearing the way for Belushi. He was also becoming good friends with fellow cast member Dan Aykroyd, perhaps his most important relationship outside of his relationship with Judith. The SNL years were rather tumultuous as Belushi became overindulgent. It was a product of its time. Cocaine was rampant in the 70s in the entertainment industry. It was known by all, and even Lorne would say Belushi could be the best or worst thing that ever happened to a show depending on which John walked through the door that night. He still had a lot to offer though, and people wanted what he had to give. They were also worried it was only a matter of time before he burned too bright and flamed out. One bright spot during these turbulent times was that he married his high school sweetheart, Judith Jacqueline, on December 31st, 1976. There might not have been a John Belushi to talk about if it weren't for someone like Judith. She wasn't some side character in his story who just existed to be a sentence in a biography of someone else's life. Their love and marriage were deeply passionate and painfully strained. It was one of the emotional backbones of John Belushi's life. In high school, when they started dating, she often rehearsed sketches with him, becoming one of his earliest supporters. She knew the various layers and sides of Belushi probably better than he did. For the entirety of his career, she was there. The highs and the lows, the good times and the tragic ones. Always there, quietly proud, and fiercely protective. The SNL years, unfortunately, were particularly destructive to them both for different reasons. He was always gone, filming, rehearsing, or, partying. There were always rumors of infidelity and the occasional confirmed affair. She was loyal, but exhausted. She managed their finances, called to check in, trying to keep him grounded, ensured he rested, and often pleaded with him to go to rehab. Dan Aykroyd said of her, "Judy was constant. John would spin off in 10 directions, but she was there to bring him back." While John Belushi was an impressive man with immense talent, it may have meant nothing if he didn't have Judith Jacklin in his life. Their story would end in heartbreaking ways for numerous reasons, but certainly not for a lack of trying on her part. But for now, they were somewhat happy. Strained, but happy. "1978. This was Belushi's year for two major reasons. He'd been on SNL for several seasons, and he was a hot commodity, but he'd yet to be used effectively beyond SNL, and that was about to change. National Lampoon was now looking to make a movie called Animal House. John Landis, the chosen director for the project, knew the perfect person to cast as the anarchic frat troublemaker John Bluto Blutarski, and it was none other than John Belushi. During this time, he'd fly back and forth between New York City and Oregon to film Animal House during the week and perform on SNL on the weekend. At the insistence of Judith, he heavily reduced his drug and alcohol intake during production. It was on July 28, 1978 that National Lampoon's Animal House premiered in New York City. As far as movies go, this was the equivalent of an off-Broadway show. It was an offbeat film that didn't have the same buzz as some of the other movies released at the time. Nobody had heard of it, and nobody really cared all that much either. That all changed very quickly. Animal House wasn't a success right out the gate, but instead, it was a sleeper hit. A movie nobody could have predicted would go on to become a cultural phenomenon. By the time word of mouth had spread far and wide, people were lining up to see the movie. The theaters were filled with rowdy young adults, college students, and those looking to relive the glory days of a different time in their lives. At the time of its release, Greek fraternities at colleges were declining, and while there's no evidence to support the notion that Animal House revived the culture, there's no denying it played a role for better or worse. Across the nation, toga parties and food fights were breaking out, either planned or spontaneous. Members in fraternities were on the rise. The success of the movie had John Belushi and his character Bluto at the center, riding a wave of success every actor dreams of. Another major point of 1978 was the first appearance of the Blues Brothers on SNL. It was a musical act featuring Belushi and Aykroyd. This wasn't comedy though, this was for real. At first, audiences were perplexed by these two comedians earnestly trying to perform real music for them with a touch of comedy. But it was hard to deny they could see the talent before them, the raspy voice of Belushi and the authenticity of Aykroyd. It became an instant phenomenon. Their look, the black suits, shades, and fedoras, became instantly iconic. Then, later in the same year, they released their first album, Briefcase Full of Guts. No, I'm kidding. That's a Death Clock song. Briefcase Full of Blues, which reached #1 on the Billboard charts and went double platinum. This was the first time a comedy duo ever had a #1 album performing music rather than comedy. To them, this wasn't a joke. It was the real deal. This success not only stunned NBC, but the music industry as a whole. And seriously, it could be argued that Spinal Tap, Death Clock, and probably even Gwar owe John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd some credit for creating like a genre around musical comedy. I don't know. Comment down below what you think of that. See if you agree with that. Almost by accident, they'd created one of the most popular R&B revival acts in the nation. So, like any live act, they began playing concerts, opening for major acts like the Grateful Dead and even Steve Martin. As a result of Animal House and the Blues Brothers, 1978 turned out to be a massive year for Belushi. Animal House made him a movie star, while the Blues Brothers made him a rock star. But behind the laughter and shades was a man unraveling at the seams. Belushi was overworked, facing unprecedented attention and indulging far beyond his limits. When would enough be enough? For John, there was just no end in sight. By early 1979, Belushi was exhausted. After 4 years on SNL, the press tour for Animal House, and the performances for the Blues Brothers, he was reaching a breaking point. Belushi was doing as Belushi does and clashing with the top brass at his current job at SNL. Lorne Michaels wanted professionalism, but John Belushi wanted freedom. Then, in May 1979, Belushi and Aykroyd appeared in their final episode of the sketch comedy show, marking the end of an era after 4 years. In 1979, Belushi starred in the drama Old Boyfriends and the Spielberg war comedy 1941. While neither was a great success, they continued to show Belushi's range and charisma. Not long after leaving SNL, John and Aykroyd began filming the Blues Brothers movie in Chicago. It wasn't an easy shoot. John was in bad shape from drug and alcohol abuse, with Aykroyd acting as his handler and protector. Judith was back in LA, where she and John moved. She continued her role as manager and stabilizer even from afar, but Aykroyd did the heavy lifting on that front during the movie's shooting. Judith was worried about his drug usage, especially when he began experimenting with heroin. She visited him several times while he was filming, during which she tried to help him stay focused and maintain his sobriety. While she was present, he'd be better. But the wheels fell off almost instantly when she left. Finally, in June 1980, The Blues Brothers was released in theaters. Critics weren't sure what to make of this semi-musical car chase epic and part absurdist comedy. Audiences, they frickin' loved it. It grossed $115 million worldwide and became one of the most successful musical comedies of all time. It features cameos from legends like Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, John Lee Hooker, and James Brown. The soundtrack was also a considerable success, achieving platinum status. He was on top of the world, yet again, but the world was about to stop spinning. There is a really ironic sketch on SNL before he left, I believe. And it's one where John Belushi is going through a graveyard and basically showing all the headstones for all the stars from SNL who died too soon. One of them's Bill Murray, a couple of them, I think one of them's like Eddie Murphy and whatnot. And yeah, you get the idea. It's really strange to watch that now because, well, we know what happened, right? Yeah, it's really somber, I guess. John Belushi was a megastar. He was on the cover of magazines, being courted for projects from numerous studios. He was a star, but the demons were getting louder and louder. The endless pressure, the expectations others put on him, and those he put on himself were all becoming too much for him to handle. In '81, he starred in 2 movies, Continental Divide and Neighbors. The first was a rom-com drama with Blair Brown, and the second was a black comedy with his friend and longtime collaborator, Dan Aykroyd. With Continental Divide, he was trying to make a more serious turn. Actually, he was trying to do that in both films. He was also trying to improve his professional demeanor and maintain sobriety. Critics were kind to his performance, but the movie underperformed. It led to Belushi believing audiences only accepted him in a role like Bluto from Animal House. He didn't want to be typecast as the wild man. With Neighbors, Belushi played an uptight suburbanite, while Aykroyd played the wild neighbor in his attempt to defy expectations. The production was chaotic, and both Belushi and Aykroyd clashed with director John Avildsen over the constant shifting of the tone. During this time, John's bad habits resurfaced in full force in the form of speedballs, which are a mix of coke and heroin. They made him difficult to predict and able to flip from charming to explosive in a matter of moments. Important PSA, don't do speedballs, kids. When Neighbors flopped, it was maybe the final straw for him. He fell into a deep slump. He was physically depleted and creatively adrift. He was planning new projects, even talking to Aykroyd about Ghostbusters, which was originally written for him. But his reliability had become a liability. He was away from home, away from Judith, isolated and abusing drugs in what was clearly a depressive episode. This next quote hits really hard. His friends would describe this time as a constant party with no joy. All day and night, he'd party with musicians, drug dealers, comedians, and whoever else hung around. He spent most of his time at the Chateau Marmont Hotel on Sunset Boulevard. He was at the edge of a cliff, and nobody could pull him back. In March 1982, he was in bungalow number 3 at the Chateau Marmont. He was a ticking time bomb. While he was working on a screenplay for a movie called Noble Rot, he was doing speedballs and other drugs several times a day. Two of the last people to see Belushi were Robert De Niro and Robin Williams, who visited him on March 4th. Then, on March 5th, in the early hours of the morning, he was injected with a fatal dose of heroin and cocaine, administered by Kathy Evelyn Smith, a Canadian backup singer and drug courier. This ultimately killed John Belushi at the age of 33. His trainer found him later that morning. The official cause was acute cocaine and heroin toxicity. Smith fled to Canada, but would later confess to administering the injection in a National Enquirer interview, which led to her being extradited and sentenced to 15 months in prison for involuntary manslaughter. Belushi's death came as a shock to just about everyone in Hollywood. He was by no means the first to die of such circumstances, but he now symbolized a generation's excess, and his death prompted a reckoning in the entertainment industry that would last decades. His funeral was held at Martha's Vineyard and led by Dan Aykroyd, who did so on a motorcycle blasting the Blues Brothers theme. Many of his old friends, co-workers, and former bosses attended the funeral. John had achieved something he dreamed of in life. He was famous, respected, admired, and lauded for his talents in film, television, and music. But even with all that, it didn't save him from the demons that haunted him. If anything, it fed them. That life and world brought them out to play in ways he couldn't control. John wanted to slow down and change direction, but it was just too late. He was gone almost as quickly as he'd arrived. It's hard to remember John Belushi purely as a comedic genius. You cannot separate the sadness that existed behind it, the vices, and how they led to his life being cut far too short. It's been a long time since John Belushi died, yet even today he's still a well-known and beloved comedian. His impact is undeniable, from being a part of the original cast of SNL to being a part of the National Lampoon franchise, and of course, his impressive time in music with the Blues Brothers. It's through the recordings of these performances on SNL, his movies, and his music that we can keep his memory alive and continue to laugh even when it seems impossible. It's also due to Judith that Belushi's legacy lives on, having written 2 books with many contributors about John and being involved in the making of a documentary about him in 2005. Despite his troubles, he gave his all to every performance. He was a star who had a lot more to give, but not enough time to give it. Who really knows what could have been had John Belushi's life taken a different turn at any point in his 33 years. Maybe he'd still be here today. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment a historical figure we haven't covered yet, subscribe and ring that bell, and share this video with someone who loves learning about history's most important people. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.